I hear that you have a folk rock musical past, and I also hear that you're a vicious assaulter of police. And I'm trying to figure out which one is true, or did you take like your non-acoustic guitar and smash it over a cop's head? Or
if you want to boil this down to something simple, it's acting with the courage of your convictions. Do not accept this dictum, this dictate from power that you are irrelevant, that you don't count, and that resistance is futile.
So joining me now is a special guest at the end of the year here, Jill Stein, godmother of the Green Party, in a lot of ways the independent movement, and has run for president several times. And I wanted to check back in with her because we're doing a story about a revolution or a show about it. Well, I want to know what she thinks and how we should do the revolution. And so Jill, welcome back to the show.
Great to be with you, Cenk. Good to see you again. And yeah, we need a revolution.
Yeah, absolutely. So,
more than ever.
More than ever, for sure. So
and I'll just add real quick at the outset, I think it's more possible than ever. It's more necessary than ever. And it's really within our reach more than it's ever been.
I totally agree with you. And that's actually the main thing I want to talk to you about, why we think the revolution is so close at hand. We've both been looking forward to it, and I don't think that we've ever been really that optimistic about it until now. Speaking for myself, but I'll come back to that issue. And I know you have strong thoughts on Gaza. I want to come back to that issue. But first, let's start with a little bit of fun and / intrigue. So I hear that you have a folk rock musical past, and I also hear that you're a vicious assaulter of police. And I'm trying to figure out which one is true, or did you take like your non-acoustic guitar and smash it over a cop's head, or what happened with the so-called assault on the police?
Oh man, I think what happened is what happens at an awful lot of the Gaza protests and the campus demonstrations, which is that the police go on the attack. And I was standing in a circle, actually, of peaceful protesters who were basically chanting and respecting each other, a diverse group of Jews and Christians and Muslims being, just exemplary citizens standing up for democracy and our rights of free speech. And the cops were all around, and then they assaulted us. And there are great videos on the internet where I am being assaulted with a bicycle, being used as a battering ram, and they are attempting to push me back and flip me over onto my neck. And luckily, we were able to resist that. While that was going on, one of the cops bent over and picked up one of my feet to like jerk me up and throw me back into a backflip. And it was definitely an assault, but the roles were reversed from what they claimed. Undoubtedly, this is part of the local police force that have been trained by the IDF, in these coalitions of Israeli trainers in so-called best practices for crowd control. And regrettably, this was not just the norm in Gaza protests, but is increasingly the norm in just police actions altogether. So there is a trial, which is still kind of, what can I say, on hold, hasn't quite happened yet, but these charges are still living, that I am accused of assaulting a police officer. I won't say more because it gets funnier the more you talk about it and the more the evidence is presented. It is more and more hysterical, but they're not kidding, they're not kidding. And there are thousands of people who've been arrested in Great Britain, charged with terrorism, for simply supporting the group Palestine Action. And we're living in such a crazy upside down world of our freedoms. Our freedoms are under attack from the same kind of policing that the people of Palestine are under attack from. And it's just another example of how the chickens come home to roost here. And it's really important that we stand up together and demand a democracy here at home and a democracy in our foreign policy, which should serve us everyday people in this country and around the world, and not serve the military-industrial complex and Palantir and the the so-called security surveillance agencies.
Yeah. So look, there's two different issues here. So first, on the assault, are there real assaults on cops? Is that a real charge? Yes, I'm sure that happens. I've seen it happen. Are there assaults on cops during protests? In my experience, 99.9% of the time, cops assault the protesters, and it doesn't matter which side you're on politically. Cops will attack the protesters, and then if the protesters they don't even have to do anything. They're like, well, we had physical contact. Yeah, I know that's because you pushed me. I didn't do anything, right? And 99.9% of the time, in my experience, it's the cops who started it, and then they charge you with assault, partly to cover their ass, right? So, look at Dr. Jill Stein. You think she went to a protest and was like, oh, let me kick some cop ass, right? It's outrageous and ridiculous and silly. But there is a super serious part to it, other than the fact that they're actually bringing you to trial, which is, that's a sham trial in a democracy. It's just terrible. But outside of that, what you mentioned there, Palantir and others, and Larry Ellison from Oracle, have kind of bragged that Gaza was a testing ground, not in terms of the bombing, but in terms of the surveillance state. And then the surveillance state is then connected to the bombing, because there's a program that Israel ran, for example, that was called Where's Daddy? And they would use AI to track people, and they weren't terrorists necessarily. AI was connecting phone lines and et cetera, and sometimes bombing seemingly random people, and they would wait for that person to go home so they could drop the bomb and kill their entire family with them, right? So I hope that is not headed in our direction, but I'm worried about the things that are saying. So normally when they go after people protesting Israel, first thing they'll do is call them anti-Semites. A little harder with you, but wait for it. If it hasn't happened yet, it probably will. But tell us about why you're so concerned about what's happening in Gaza.
Well, I grew up just after the Holocaust in a Jewish community, in a Jewish household, attending religious school. Not for my regular education, but I was in religious school until I was so-called confirmed, which is what you do if you're a Reformed Jew. And this was like right after the Holocaust. I had neighbors in my Jewish community who had been in the death camps during the Holocaust. So as a child, I was extremely hyper aware of what genocide meant, and that it must never happen again. And I grew up really taking that to heart. That's what made it possible for me as a child to move forward in the world. That we weren't going to live in, a constant ongoing state of terror and fear, that Holocaust and genocide would not happen again, not to anybody. And I took that very seriously, became a social activist, very much, I think, growing out of that experience. And then when the genocide began after, October 7th, and the breakout from the death camp, basically, I could not be quiet about it. And that was actually one of the reasons why I jumped into the race. There were other reasons as well, but that was a compelling one, that I just could not, in good conscience, allow this to happen without speaking out against it. And to me, it's not just the Palestinians, although their lives are absolutely front and center here, but really it's all of us. It's human rights, it's international law that are being torn to shreds right now. And if, the US is not going to be top dog forever. We are kind of in rapid decline here as an empire, kind of in its final throes at the moment. Economically, we've been superseded by the BRICS coalition, which is now running circles around the G7 or the G20, however you look at it. They got way more people, and they also have way more economic capacity. rising military capacity, which certainly is equivalent to ours. So we cannot rely on this foreign policy that we have been enacting since the Second World War of so-called full spectrum dominance. That's what they actually call it over at the Pentagon. The notion that the US will be top dog forever in all dimensions of life and the economy and resources, they all belong to us. It's like the Monroe Doctrine writ large. That's basically US policy. And we committed some 70 or 80 regime change operations in addition to really nonstop wars. Have Donald Trump bombing, 7 countries over the course of the last year with massive bipartisan approval. So yeah, blame it on Trump, but right, the Democrats can't wait to vote with enormous enthusiasm and with a huge majority to give him every dime, in fact, more dimes and dollars and billions than he even asked for. So we have an extremely screwed up foreign policy, which is really part and parcel of this notion that we are the empire, bar none, and we will always be that way. We're not gonna, we are in rapid decline right now, economically, militarily, our stature as a member of self-respecting nations. So it's very, by destroying international law in Gaza, we're basically setting ourselves up to also be the victims of the next empire. If you think that's good for you, well, go ahead and keep sitting on the sidelines. But if you think that we too, as human beings, deserve justice and security, that all people do, it's very important that we all stand up and demand an end to the genocide, which means an end to the duopoly and the two parties that are bought and paid for by the Palantirs, by the security agencies, by the weapon manufacturers, by the big pharma and the health insurance industry. We have the best government money can buy, which is great for the CEOs and the corporations and the billionaires, but Americans are really on their last, hanging on with their last breath at the moment. Households are in unprecedented levels of debt, consumer debt, credit card debt, household debt, repossessions of automobiles are at all-time highs. People are struggling. Half of all Americans are struggling to keep a roof over their heads. This is not working, and this is the flip side of empire. The flip side of that budget, $1 trillion record budget for peacetime, more than ever in the past. More than that is being appropriated by both Democrats and Republicans. And it is not only failing madly as a foreign policy overseas, it's also failing madly as a domestic policy. 25 or so million Americans are about to see their health insurance premiums because Congress, in all of its wisdom, could not manage to protect the benefits of the ACA. We should be going way beyond the ACA. We would save, in fact, up to $1 trillion a year by moving to a Medicare for all system that provides healthcare as a human right for everyone. We could massively diminish the cost of housing by implementing rent control, which has been actually prohibited in most states around the country. Very difficult to pass because of the prohibitions against it, even though people want it. People want to end the genocide. In fact, it's twice as many Americans now who oppose Israel and the US genocide in Gaza as the numbers that approve it. More Americans now identify with Palestinians than Israelis. We can solve this, and it's really important. I guess my final, my concluding point here is that we need to stand up with the courage of our convictions, because in fact, we do have the numbers, we have the solutions, we represent the values. Do not be a slave to this intimidation, these threats, and the harm being inflicted on us by the duopoly. We can solve this if we stand up with the courage of our convictions.
Yep. So one quick point before I ask you the next question, which I think is actually really important and one that I wouldn't have imagined that I'd ask you. But look, I grew up in a town that was predominantly Jewish, and that culture was one of fighting for the underdog, challenging authority. and me saying and meaning never again. So it's just wonderful to see Jewish Americans, so many Jewish Americans standing up and saying, yeah, we meant it. We meant never again. And so we're gonna fight on this ground. This is the most important ground there is. So I love that. Now, what's interesting, Dr. Stein, is that I very much notice a right-wing revolt happening, and I'm curious whether you notice it too. So it started with the Epstein files, it moved to Israel, but also, wait a minute, they wanted to actually reduce the Pentagon, which is not a position that I've ever seen from the right wing before, but they noticed that they never pass an audit. They can't account for $400 or $500 billion every year. And so they wanted to, I proposed cutting it by 100 billion, and tons of MAGA agreed. And then Trump wound up adding 150 billion to the Pentagon, and a lot of MAGA, his voters, were mad about it. And now they're even getting to Marjorie Taylor Greene going, wait, why are we doubling healthcare premiums? So are you seeing the same thing I'm seeing here? And if you are, how encouraged are you by it?
Very much encouraged, and yes, absolutely, I'm seeing the same thing. And the whole notion of America first is that we should be serving the American people, not putting Israel first, which in fact is what the foreign policy has been of both the Democrats and Republicans. And remember, many of those who voted for Donald Trump were basically Bernie Sanders voters who were really outraged at the way that he was manipulated and really shot down from the inside unfairly by the DNC and the leadership of the Democratic Party. So, in my view, it really shouldn't be a choice between Democrats or Republicans. It should be a choice between people-powered politics or corporate-powered, billionaire-captured politics. I think that's the best way to describe the duopoly, and I think there's enormous common ground with America Firsters, with even with MAGA. There are areas of difference, but a lot of that is the product of manipulation and propaganda. I think that sitting down and having dialogue and discussion is a great thing. I've experienced that myself, as a candidate, which you know well yourself. You have to go out and talk to people. And I was first tricked into running for office back in the year 2001, before many of you were born. And at the time, we had the Tea Party movement, and we had allegedly opposing views on many things, including a woman's right to choose and so forth. And I found that when we actually sat down and had a chance to talk to each other, there was enormous common ground, and we didn't easily fit into these pigeonholes that were, trying to pit us against each other. So yes, I'm generally very encouraged by what polls are showing right now, which is that it's getting harder and harder to manipulate Americans. Not that it doesn't happen, but people are now very cynical about the media. And in fact, more Americans, polls show, now believe that the media is lying. That is big mainstream media, corporate media, more likely that they're lying to you than telling you the truth. By large numbers, people are screaming for an independent political choice. And if you look at the curves, I actually plotted this out because I couldn't find the graph. The numbers in the last Gallup poll were absolutely staggering, but they don't dare put it into a graph because it shows with much too great clarity what's going on. You can see the disapprovals for the Democratic Party going up like this. That's the disapprovals are going up over time, and the approvals are crashing and burning over time, so that it's now about twice as many disapprove of the Democratic Party as approve. And the numbers that identify as independent now exceeds the number who identify as Republican or Democrat. And the numbers who want an independent third party choice and say that the two mainstream parties are just doing a terrible job, those numbers are also at all-time highs. The numbers who say, oh no, don't worry, two parties is just fine, that has crashed and burned as well. So the setting has been laid out there for a real turnaround, and it's just a question of when. And as Malcolm X says, we're not outnumbered, we're just out organized. So that is the issue of the day, and credit to real journalism, like on this channel, that dares to actually ask these questions and dares to actually inform viewers about the real choices that you do have.
Well, we appreciate that, Dr. Stein. So let me follow up on that. So you could argue that no one has quite fought both the Republican Party and the Democratic Party as much as you have, and corporate media while you're at it. I might be in the competition, but you've got a good claim to that title. And so, and now we see both parties not just falling in approval, but what I want to get to is why, right? And you saw with the Democrats, once they realized that Biden and the entire Democratic leadership were lying to them about Biden's age and ability, there was kind of a great awakening there, like, oh, wait a minute, we might have been lied to our whole lives by these guys, right?
Yeah.
And so then on the Republican side now, the same thing is happening, where they're like, wait, we said we were anti-war, and Trump's bombing 7 countries. Some I've never even heard of. What are we doing here, right? And Trump said he wanted to release the Epstein files. Now he wants to bury the Epstein files, et cetera. And there's a great awakening happening there. And my thesis, and I'm curious what your take on it is that our real opponents was actually corporate media, because corporate media was the one diluting both sides with propaganda and setting them against one another. And now that online media is starting to be more powerful than establishment media, people are beginning to see, oh wait a minute, it turns out we're not that divided. It's actually us versus the people up top. That's why I keep saying, look up, right? The guy who crossed the border without $1 in his pocket isn't the problem. The guy to your left isn't a problem. The guy to your right isn't a problem. The problem is the people up top. So do you think that mainstream media has been the actual original patient zero of what's wrong with this country?
Yeah, very much. I mean, that's why the First Amendment is first. We need a free press that is willing to hold power to account, that's willing to tell the truth, that will inform and educate the public. And if you have media that is bought and paid for by the Larry Ellisons of the world, that's not what they're going to do. They will serve corporate power. And I find it kind of funny and pathetic when people think that, oh, we just have to listen to both Fox News and CNN, and then we'll figure out what's really going on. No, that's actually not the case. You'll get double dose of misinformation and disinformation, and you won't get like real analysis. When we're talking about what are the prime movers here, that people are in a state of revolt now, it's not only that we don't have the media, but it's the conditions of our lives. It's the fact that people don't have health care, that 100 million Americans are carrying medical debt, that 2/3 of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck, half of Americans can't afford their rent. I mean, people are in an utter state of panic right now, and they don't have time to follow the news, regrettably. So to me, the real driver here is the material conditions of our lives. But people deserve to have, real thoughtful analysis and news with integrity that's accessible and available. You really have to dig for it now. And most of what is invading our consciousness is, corporate propaganda, and the laws that used to protect Americans from propaganda were repealed by who? Obama. So everyday people are at real disadvantage for kind of understanding our world and being able to fight back. So that makes what you do at this station extremely important, and it makes the other outlets for real true reporting that are not corporate owned absolutely critical. And I couldn't agree with you more that the First Amendment, is first for good reasons. We've got to have that. I do think that, when we're mobilizing people, at least 1 out of every 3 voters doesn't bother to vote. And that's in just like the presidential poll, which is the most attended of any election. It's even worse going down from there. But so many people are staying home. It's not because the Green Party told them to. We didn't, we're there reflecting what it is that people want. It's because people don't get to hear that there are actually reasons for them to come out to vote. That's why the Democrats are very busy silencing their opponents. Butch Ware, for example, is a candidate for governor in a field in California, in a field that's really hurting for an anti-genocide voice, for a healthcare as a human right voice, for rent control voice. You have this candidate among a whole field of extremely lackluster candidates. It's going to be a jungle primary. There's a real potential for him to break through. That's Butch Ware running as a Green for governor in California, where there's going to be one primary, and it'll be a gazillion corporate Democrats, one or two unknown Republicans, and one candidate who's actually standing up for what it is that people want. And I think that's really where that's where the breakthrough is. And as part of that agenda, we're also calling for, liberating the media and ensuring the freedom of the press. If you talk like you do now, you're not only subject to all kinds of slings and arrows, but threats, and you'll be deplatformed. And it's very hard. The press is up against a lot in trying to actually inform the American people about genocide, about what's going on in the DRC or in Sudan, or just with our own healthcare. In all the healthcare debate that they had in Congress, you didn't hear a peep really about Medicare for all and the fact that we would save $1 trillion a year, save it, not lose it. We would save it by standing up for a healthcare system that gets rid of that waste, red tape, and bureaucracy that is sucking 30% of our healthcare dollars away from healthcare.
Yep.
If we stand up on the things that we really need and that people are clamoring for, we do have the potential to break through on some of these key races. And I encourage people to check out Butch Ware and California governor's race.
Okay, so one last question for you, but again, before we get there, it would be amazing if, let's say it was a corporate Democrat versus Ware in the finals in the California governor's race, if there was a green-red alliance. But in the old days, you would have thought that's crazy. But these days, there's some chance that you could tell Republicans Jill Stein is here to help you, and they might actually believe you. And they might go, oh, okay, if she's for healthcare, and my healthcare, and not the healthcare of people in other countries or the healthcare of the executives at some corporation that donated to you, right? I don't know. Stranger things have happened, but I mean, things are moving in unpredictable directions. And to your point about media, one last thing, and then the question. I've told this story many times, but I don't think I've ever told it to you. In 2016, the last political event we did before the election was a town hall with you. And I got back from reporters in Washington, so corporate media, just when we thought you guys were being credible. You go and interview Jill Stein. I was like, wait, aren't people in news supposed to give everyone their options and not prejudge? So the whole idea that they're objective is hilarious, right? They literally want to limit your options, not expand your options. And kind of shoehorn you in. But anyway, the last question is related to all of the things that we've been discussing, which is, look, we're doing this show on the revolution, and so what do you think? So we're both ironically excited. A lot of people look at 2025 as a disaster and are depressed going into 26. But you and I seeing a convergence for the first time in our lives and an awakening for the first time in our lives in a lot of ways are excited. So how do we finish this? Obviously, when we say revolution, we always mean nonviolent, peaceful, political revolution. So what do you think actually gets the job done?
I think we have to fight peacefully on all battlefronts, and that means social movements and also challenging in the political arena. Power concedes nothing without a demand. You have to challenge power where it lives, in the halls of power, and we have to contest for power. And whether you win or not, whether you, quote, win the office or not, you win by engaging our democracy and rejecting the notion that censoring political dialogue is somehow going to magically come up with a solution when you're basically allowing corporations to rule the day. That's impossible. If you want to boil this down to something simple, it's acting with the courage of your convictions. Do not accept this dictum, this dictate from power that you are irrelevant, that you don't count, and that resistance is futile. They tell you that precisely because they are terrified that when we have the courage of our convictions, we have the numbers, we have the agenda, we have the solutions that people are clamoring for. So we can actually solve this if we take ourselves seriously and stand up and not take no for an answer. Our very lives depend on doing that.
All right, Dr. Jill Stein, leader of the Green Party for a long time, and also one of the leaders of the independent movement in this country for a very long time. We really appreciate your leadership and your foresight, and we appreciate you coming on. Also, Happy New Year.
Same to you, Tink. Good to see you.
All right, wonderful to see you.